There was a respected doctor who believed he knew everything. There was a dedicated nurse who never gave up. And there was a patient on the brink of death who held a secret capable of changing everything. When one's arrogance meets the other's persistence, and the truth finally comes to light, you'll discover that it's not always the person with the highest degree who truly saves lives. This is a story about humility, redemption, and the silent power of those who work in the shadows of medicine. Bam! And my name is Laura Brennan, and I've been a registered nurse for 15 years. I work in the intensive care unit at Seattle Memorial Hospital, where the rain taps against the windows almost as constantly as the monitors beep beside each bed. Seattle chose me as much as I chose it. I grew up in a small town in Montana, where healthcare meant a single clinic, and the nearest hospital was 40 miles away. I watched my grandmother die from complications that could have been prevented with proper monitoring. That day, I promised myself I would become someone who paid attention to the details others missed. The ICU is where I found my calling. It's not glamorous. It's 12-hour shifts of exhaustion, of holding hands with dying patients, of celebrating the small victories that most people never see. But it's also where I learned that medicine isn't just about knowledge from textbooks. It's about intuition built from thousands of hours at the bedside, about recognizing patterns in breathing, in skin tone, in the subtle changes that machines can't always detect. Then there's Dr. Marcus Hartwell, brilliant surgeon, graduated top of his class from Johns Hopkins, published in every major medical journal. He's the kind of doctor administrators love and nurses dread. In the operating room, his hands are steady and precise. Outside of it, his ego fills every space he enters. To him, nurses are just extensions of the equipment, there to follow orders without question or thought. Before I continue, I want to know something from you. Where are you watching this story from? It's always incredible to see people from so many different places following these accounts. Write it down in the comments. I really want to know. It was a cold October morning when Thomas Reeves arrived in our unit. He was 58 years old, a high school history teacher who had undergone what should have been a routine gallbladder removal 3 days prior. But nothing about his recovery was routine. He'd developed complications, severe inflammation that had spread faster than anyone anticipated. Dr. Hartwell had performed the emergency surgery to address it, and by all accounts, it had gone well. The surgical notes were flawless, but something felt wrong to me from the moment I took over his care. Thomas was restless in a way that concerned me. Not the normal discomfort of post-surgical pain, but something deeper. His vitals were technically within acceptable ranges, but they were hovering at the edges. His heart rate was slightly elevated, his blood pressure slightly low, his oxygen saturation just barely adequate. Individually, none of these were alarming. Together, they painted a picture I'd seen before, the quiet beginning of a cascade that could turn catastrophic. I documented everything meticulously, every measurement, every observation, every tiny detail. I increased the frequency of my checks on Thomas, sometimes popping in every 20 minutes instead of every hour. I adjusted his position, monitored his fluid intake and output, watched the color of his surgical drains, and I noted all of it in his chart, along with my concerns. During morning rounds, I brought my observations to Dr. Hartwell. The entire medical team was there, 3 residents, 2 interns, the attending physician, and 4 other nurses. I explained what I'd noticed, suggested that perhaps we should consider additional imaging or lab work to rule out internal bleeding or infection. Dr. Hartwell looked at me over his reading glasses and laughed. Actually laughed. He told the group that this is what happens when nurses try to practice medicine instead of focusing on their actual jobs. His exact words still burn in my memory. If this story is gripping you as much as it marked me, take a moment now and subscribe to the channel. We're close to the goal of 500 subscribers, and your subscription makes all the difference so that more people can discover moving stories like this one. And the humiliation was immediate and total. I felt every eye in that room on me, some sympathetic, most carefully neutral. No one wants to be associated with someone who's just been publicly ridiculed by the most powerful surgeon in the hospital. One of the younger residents actually smirked. Dr. Hartwell continued his rounds as if I hadn't spoken, discussing Thomas's case with the easy confidence of someone who has never been wrong. According to him, Thomas was progressing exactly as expected. The elevated heart rate was normal post-surgical anxiety. The blood pressure was adequate for his age and condition. The oxygen levels were fine. Everything I'd worried about was dismissed as the overreaction of a nurse who didn't understand the bigger picture. He didn't say it explicitly, but the message was clear. Stay in your lane. take temperatures, change bedding, administer the medications we prescribe, and leave the actual medicine to those of us who went to medical school. I returned to Thomas's bedside burning with shame and anger, but more than that, with certainty. I knew I was right. 15 years of experience had taught me to trust my instincts, and every instinct I had was screaming that Thomas was in trouble. But what could I do? I was a nurse. Dr. Hartwell was not just any doctor. He was the chief of surgery. Challenging him meant risking my career, my reputation, everything I'd worked for. So I did the only thing I could. I documented everything with even more precision than before. Every vital sign, every assessment, every minute change. I made sure my notes were thorough enough that if something went wrong, there would be a clear record that I had seen it coming. It felt like building a life raft I hoped I'd never need. Thomas himself was quiet, drifting in and out of restless sleep. When he was awake, he seemed confused, disoriented in a way that the pain medications didn't fully explain. I held his hand during one of these moments, and he looked at me with eyes that seemed to be pleading for something he couldn't articulate. I promised him I wouldn't leave him alone, that I would watch over him. It was all I could offer. If this part moved you as much as it moved me, leave your like now. This way, YouTube understands that this story deserves to be seen by more people, and that really helps the channel continue to grow. The night shifts in the ICU have their own rhythm. The overhead lights dim to let patients rest. The daytime bustle of doctors and specialists fades away, leaving just the core night staff. It's quieter, but in many ways more intense. This is when patients often take their turns for the worse, when the body's defenses are lowest, when small problems become big ones. I was the senior nurse on duty that night, responsible for 6 patients including Thomas. The other nurses were capable, but less experienced. I made my rounds every hour like clockwork, but I checked on Thomas twice as often. Something was building. I could feel it the way you can feel a storm gathering even before the first drops of rain fall. Around 2 a.m, I was at the nurse's station reviewing labs when an alarm went off. Thomas's heart rate monitor. I was on my feet and moving before the sound fully registered. When I reached his bedside, my worst fears were confirming themselves before my eyes. His heart rate had spiked to 140. His blood pressure had dropped significantly. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor that I recognized immediately as shock. I called for assistance while my hands moved on autopilot, checking his surgical sites, assessing his abdomen. It was distended, rigid, internal bleeding, exactly what I'd been afraid of since that morning. The surgical repair had failed, or perhaps there'd been a second bleed that had been developing slowly all day, invisible on the outside but catastrophic on the inside. The protocol was clear. Call the attending physician, prepare for emergency surgery, start fluid resuscitation. But Dr. Hartwell's orders from that morning were also clear. Thomas was stable, routine monitoring only, no interventions without his explicit approval. And Dr. Hartwell was at home, asleep, 45 minutes away even without traffic. I had maybe 30 minutes before Thomas went into full cardiac arrest. Probably less. This is the moment every nurse dreads and trains for in equal measure. The moment when you have to choose between following orders and following your conscience. I thought about my grandmother in that tiny Montana clinic, about all the what-ifs that had haunted my family. I thought about Thomas's wife, whom I'd met earlier that day, a gentle woman who taught kindergarten and brought him crossword puzzles he was too sick to complete. Then I stopped thinking and started acting. I initiated the rapid response protocol without waiting for approval. I called down to the attending physician on call, not Hartwell, explaining the situation. I ordered a portable ultrasound to confirm what I already knew. I started aggressive fluid resuscitation, hung 2 large-bore IVs, and began pushing the medications that would support his blood pressure and heart function. I called for the operating room to be prepared, called for blood products to be cross-matched and ready. The on-call physician arrived within 10 minutes, took one look at Thomas, and agreed with every decision I'd made. The ultrasound confirmed significant internal bleeding. Thomas was crashing, and crashing fast. We had him in the operating room within 20 minutes of that first alarm. The surgical team found exactly what I'd predicted, a slow leak from the surgical site that had been bleeding all day, undetected, until it became a hemorrhage. They saved his life, but I knew, and they knew, that if I had waited even 15 more minutes for Hartwell to be contacted and to arrive, Thomas would have coded on the table. He would have died while we waited for permission to save him. I documented everything in excruciating detail, every decision, every medication, every rationale. I noted the times, the vital signs, the findings. I made copies of everything and sent them to my personal email because I knew what was coming. I had circumvented the chain of command. I had acted without authorization from the attending surgeon. In the hierarchy of hospital medicine, I had committed an unforgivable sin. Dr. Hartwell arrived at the hospital at 6 a.m, just as dawn was breaking over Seattle's skyline. I was still at Thomas's bedside in the recovery area, monitoring him as he slowly stabilized. I was exhausted, running on adrenaline and 3 cups of terrible hospital coffee. I saw Hartwell coming down the hallway, and I knew from his expression that this was going to be bad. He didn't even wait until we were somewhere private. Right there in the recovery unit, in front of other patients, other nurses, visiting family members, he unleashed his fury. How dare I undermine his authority? How dare I act without his explicit orders? How dare I presume to make medical decisions above my station and training? His face was red, his voice rising with each accusation. He called me reckless, called me dangerous, said I had put Thomas at risk with my cowboy nursing. He laughed, actually laughed again, at my audacity in thinking I knew better than a surgeon with 20 years of experience. He said that nurses like me were the reason doctors couldn't trust their staff, that I had violated every principle of the medical hierarchy that kept hospitals functioning. I stood there and took it. What else could I do? I had known this was coming. I had made my choice in the middle of the night, and I would accept the consequences. But inside, I was burning, not just with anger, but with certainty. I had saved Thomas's life. Every minute I had waited would have brought him closer to death, and Hartwell was more concerned about his authority being questioned than about the fact that his patient was alive. When he finally finished, he told me I would be hearing from hospital administration. There would be a formal investigation into my conduct. I could expect disciplinary action, possibly suspension, potentially the loss of my nursing license. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with everyone staring. Tabakigori. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. It's a strange kind of limbo. Not fired, but not working. Not guilty, but not innocent. I spent my days in my small apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, watching the rain streak down my windows, wondering if my career was over. The hospital administrators conducted interviews with everyone who had been involved. The night shift nurses, the on-call physician, the surgical team, even Dr. Hartwell himself. I had to appear before a review board, a panel of senior hospital staff including administrators, the chief of staff, and the head of nursing. I brought my documentation, my detailed notes, my timeline of events. I explained my reasoning, my observations, my decision-making process. Dr. Hartwell testified that I had acted recklessly, that Thomas had been stable, and my interventions were unnecessary and dangerous. He claimed that the bleeding would have been detected during routine morning rounds and handled appropriately. He painted me as an overconfident nurse who had let a God complex override proper protocol. The hospital staff were divided. Some nurses supported me quietly, privately telling me they would have done the same thing, but publicly, most stayed silent. Speaking up meant risking retaliation, meant being labeled as difficult, as not a team player. I understood. I didn't blame them. The system protects itself, and those who challenge it pay the price. The on-call physician who had backed my decisions that night testified on my behalf. He explained that Thomas had been in imminent danger, that my interventions had been appropriate and necessary. But even his support was muted, careful not to directly criticize Hartwell or the system that had failed to catch Thomas's deterioration earlier. I prepared myself for the worst. I started looking at nursing positions in other cities, other states. I thought about leaving hospital nursing entirely, maybe going into home health or education. Anything that would let me keep my license if they decided not to revoke it. 3 weeks after that terrible night, the review board scheduled a final meeting. This was it, the moment when they would announce their decision. I dressed carefully that morning, professional but not formal, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. The meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning in one of the hospital's administrative conference rooms. When I arrived, I was surprised to see how many people were there. The full review board, Dr. Hartwell looking stern and vindicated, several administrators I didn't recognize, and to my shock, Thomas Reeves himself, sitting in a wheelchair with his wife beside him. I hadn't known he would be there. He'd been transferred to a regular floor a week earlier and was recovering well, but I hadn't been allowed to visit him during my suspension. He looked thin and tired, but his eyes were alert. When he saw me, he nodded slightly, and I couldn't read his expression. The head of the review board, Dr. Patricia Morrison, called the meeting to order. She began by summarizing the incident, the complaint that had been filed, the investigation that had been conducted. She noted the divided opinions, the conflicting testimonies, the complex ethical questions involved. She spoke in the careful, measured tones of someone who has made difficult decisions before. Then she said something I didn't expect. Before the board announced its decision, Mr. Reeves had requested the opportunity to make a statement. She asked if anyone objected. Dr. Hartwell shifted in his seat but said nothing. How could he object to hearing from his own patient? Thomas's wife helped him to his feet. He was unsteady but determined. He cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice was weak but clear, and what he said changed everything. Yaris Thomas began by thanking everyone for saving his life. He acknowledged the skill of the surgical team, the care of the hospital staff, the advanced facilities that had been available. But then his tone changed. He said there was something people needed to know, something he hadn't told anyone until now because he wasn't sure anyone would believe him. He explained that during his crisis, he hadn't been as unconscious as everyone everyone thought. He'd been in what he later learned was called a semi-conscious state, aware of what was happening around him, but unable to communicate, unable to move or speak. It's a terrifying condition that sometimes occurs with certain types of medical trauma and medication combinations. He remembered the morning rounds. He remembered hearing Dr. Hartwell dismiss my concerns with that laugh. He remembered feeling frustrated, wanting to tell them that I was right, that something was terribly wrong inside him, but being unable to form words. He remembered the fear as the day went on, and he felt himself getting worse, slipping further away. Then he described that night. He remembered the alarm going off. He remembered my voice, calm and commanding, telling other nurses what to do. He remembered hearing me make phone calls, give orders, explain what was happening. He said he remembered thinking that someone finally understood, that someone was fighting for him. Most powerfully, he said he remembered a moment around 2:30 in the morning, while I was preparing him for emergency surgery. He'd been barely conscious, and I had leaned close and whispered to him that he was going to be okay, that I wouldn't let anything happen to him, that he needed to hold on just a little longer. He said my voice in that moment was the lifeline he clung to. Then Thomas looked directly at Dr. Hartwell. His voice was stronger now, fueled by emotion. He said that while he respected Hartwell's skills and credentials, he needed everyone in this room to know the truth. When Dr. Hartwell had given up on detecting what was wrong, when the system had failed to catch his deterioration, I had seen it. I had fought for him. I had saved his life. The room was absolutely silent. Me, como and the outcome of that meeting was an immediate vindication. The hospital system doesn't work that way. But Thomas's testimony changed the trajectory completely. The review board cleared me of all charges of misconduct. They acknowledged that while my actions had technically violated protocol, they had been medically sound and necessary. I was reinstated without any mark on my record. More than that, the incident sparked a larger conversation about nurse autonomy and the culture of medical hierarchy. The hospital implemented new policies allowing experienced ICU nurses more latitude in emergency decision-making. They created a rapid response system where nurses could escalate concerns without going through the attending physician first. Dr. Hartwell wasn't fired or formally disciplined. He's still a surgeon at Seattle Memorial. But something changed in him. He apologized to me privately, awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable but genuine. He said Thomas's testimony had forced him to confront some hard truths about his own arrogance. I don't know if he's truly changed, but I've noticed he listens more carefully when nurses speak now. It's a start. As for me, I'm still here, still working the ICU, still watching for the subtle signs others miss. Thomas recovered fully and returned to teaching. He stops by the hospital occasionally to visit, always bringing cookies his wife bakes. He calls me his guardian angel, but I'm not an angel. I'm just a nurse who pays attention. This story changed not just my career, but my understanding of what it really means to be a nurse. It's not about following orders blindly. It's about being the patient's advocate even when it's hard, even when it costs you something. It's about trusting your training and your instincts, about having the courage to speak up and the strength to face the consequences. And now I want to know from you, have you ever lived through or witnessed a situation where someone underestimated your professional capacity? How did you handle it? Share your experience here in the comments. I love reading every story you bring. If this story touched your heart in some way, please subscribe to the channel. I share real and moving accounts from the lives of nursing professionals every week, and your subscription means the world to me and helps more people discover these stories that deserve to be told. And don't leave yet. There's another incredible video waiting for you right there on the screen. I promise you won't regret it. Until the next story.